Get out! Vincent Hale shoved the divorce papers across the marble table so hard they skidded off the edge and scattered at his wife's feet. Then he grabbed her coffee mug, the one she had used every morning for 15 years, and hurled it against the wall. It shattered. He did not flinch. He pointed at the door like she was staff he was terminating. You have 1 hour to pack what's yours, and don't flatter yourself thinking any of this was ever yours. Mira Dane stood in the wreckage of her marriage and did not move. If this story found you today, subscribe to our channel, follow every step of Mira's journey, and comment your city below. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The storm had been building over Manhattan for 3 hours before it finally broke. Mira heard it first as a low vibration in the penthouse windows, a pressure change that made her ears pop, and then the rain came in a single curtain of gray that swallowed the skyline whole. She had been standing at the window when Vincent walked in, and she had turned to greet him the way she always did, with that particular kind of attention a woman gives a man she has loved for a long time, reading his posture before he speaks, measuring the set of his jaw. What she read that evening was not anger. It was something more organized than anger. It was decision. He set his briefcase down. He removed his jacket and handed it to no one, letting it fall over the back of a chair. He poured himself 2 fingers of bourbon and drank half of it standing at the bar without offering her any. Then he reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and pulled out a manila envelope and placed it on the marble coffee table between them. I had Marcus draw those up this morning, Vincent said. Everything's already been reviewed. There's nothing to negotiate. Mira looked at the envelope. Her name was printed on the front in the clean sans serif font that Vincent's legal team used for everything. She recognized it the way you recognize a sound you have been dreading without knowing it. Vincent, she said, and his name felt strange in her mouth, too short for everything she meant by it. Don't, he said. He sat down in the chair across from her, crossed one leg over the other, and looked at her with the expression he used in boardrooms, when he had already won and was simply waiting for the other side to understand that. I've been thinking about this for a long time, Mira. The decision is made. What's in that envelope is more than fair considering. Considering what? Her voice was steady. She was surprised by that. She had expected it to shake. Considering that you haven't contributed anything real to this marriage in years. He finished his bourbon and held the empty glass loosely between his fingers. You stopped working before we were even married. You stopped growing. You became... He paused, not searching for the word, but presenting it the way you present a verdict. Stagnant. The word landed in the space between them, and neither of them moved. Stagnant, Mira repeated. I don't mean it unkindly. His tone was smooth, almost clinical, the tone of a man explaining a business decision to a board member who would not be retained. You are a product of a certain period of my life. That period is over. I am moving in a different direction, and frankly, you are not equipped to move with me. A different direction, she said. He picked up his phone from the side table and turned it toward her. There was a photo on the screen, a young woman with dark hair and a laugh that took up the whole frame, leaning against the railing of what looked like a yacht in warm water. The woman was not yet 30. Her eyes were bright in the way eyes are bright when the world has not yet asked anything serious of them. Her name is Camilla, Vincent said, and there was something in his voice when he said her name that he had not used with Mira in a very long time, a softness, an anticipation. She understands where I'm going. She fits the life I'm building now. Mira looked at the photo for a long moment. She looked at the girl's laugh and the warm water behind her and the ease of someone who had walked into a life rather than built one. Then she looked at Vincent. How long? She asked. That's not relevant. How long, Vincent? He set the phone down. 18 months. The number landed harder than everything else had. 18 months meant the anniversary trip to Florence had been a lie. It meant the quiet Sunday mornings where he had reached for her hand at the breakfast table had been theater. It meant that for a year and a half, she had been living inside a version of her marriage that had already been vacated, a house where someone had removed all the furniture, and she had not noticed because she kept her eyes on the door. She sat down, not because she was weak, but because she needed a solid surface beneath her while she reorganized everything she understood about the last year and a half. Open the envelope, Vincent said, not gently. She opened it. The legal language was dense, and she was not a lawyer, but she had spent 15 years watching Vincent move money, and she understood the architecture of a document designed to give as little as possible while appearing generous. She read it twice. She read it a third time. "The townhouse in Astoria," she said. "It's a good property." "It's been on the market for 2 years, Vincent. It needs a new roof, and the foundation report from last spring was, 'You're not getting the penthouse Mira.'" His voice went flat. "You're not getting the Hampton house. You're not getting any of the investment accounts or the portfolio. You didn't earn those. What you're getting is a roof over your head and a settlement that will cover your living expenses for 18 months while you figure out whatever comes next for you. And the stocks." She was still looking at the document. There was a line item near the bottom that she almost missed. "You're giving me the Project O shares." Vincent actually laughed. It was a short, dismissive sound that he did not bother to dress up. "Yes, take them. Consider it a parting gift." He stood smoothing the front of his shirt. "Project O is a dead company walking. The founders had one idea, and the idea didn't work, and now it's sitting on a pile of bad press and worse technology. The shares are worth about as much as the paper they're printed on." "Then why is it in the settlement at all?" "Because Marcus included every holding for the sake of completeness. It's a technicality. Don't read anything into it." He walked to the window and looked out at the rain hammering the city below. "Sign the papers tonight, Mira. My attorney needs them by morning." She looked at the line on the document again. Project O, 40,000 shares, valued in the document at a number so low it was almost insulting. "I'll need a few days to have someone review." "You don't have a few days." He turned from the window. "If you don't sign by tomorrow morning, I pull the Astoria property off the table and we go to litigation. You can spend the next 18 months paying a lawyer with money you don't have to fight for a settlement that will end up being worse than what you're holding right now." He tilted his head slightly, and she saw in that gesture every boardroom, every negotiation, every deal where he had positioned the other side until there was only one door left. "You're not equipped for a fight, Mira. You haven't been in the world long enough to know how to win one." She looked at him for a long moment. She looked at the man she had married, the one who had pulled her close in the kitchen of their first small apartment and told her she was the only person who actually understood him, the man who had once been afraid of failing and had told her so in the dark. She looked for some remnant of that man and found none. What stood at the window was something that had been assembled from ambition and money and the accumulated belief that consequence was for other people. "All right," she said. She picked up the pen from the coffee table. She signed her name on every line that required it. She did not let her hand shake. She placed the papers back in the envelope. She stood. She picked up the small overnight bag she had packed that morning because some part of her had understood before her conscious mind did, and she walked toward the elevator. "Mira." Vincent spoke to her back. She stopped, but did not turn. "Try not to be bitter," he said. "It's not a good look at your age." She stepped into the elevator. The doors closed. She rode it down 41 floors in silence. The lobby doorman, a man named Gerald, who had always greeted her by name and asked after her, Health watched her walk through the glass doors into the storm. She did not take a cab. She walked for 2 blocks in the rain before she stopped on a corner beneath a broken awning and pressed her back against the wall and breathed. She was 51 years old. She had given 15 years of her life to a man who had just handed her a failing stock and a house with a damaged foundation and told her not to be bitter. She had no job. She had no current resume. She had spent 15 years managing a household, attending events, supporting Vincent's career with the kind of invisible labor that never shows up on any accounting sheet. She had traded her own professional identity for a life that had just been taken back. She stood in the rain and breathed, and then very quietly, very carefully, the part of Mira Dane that Vincent Hale had never been able to see began to wake up. She had been a financial analyst before she married him. A good one. Not the kind of good that gets celebrated at parties, but the kind that compounds quietly over time, that sees things other people overlook, that reads a market the way a musician reads a room. She had walked away from that career when Vincent's schedule made two demanding careers impossible, and they had both understood without discussing it that his career was the one that would continue. She had not resented it. She had genuinely believed in what they were building together, but she still had the instincts. They did not go away because you stopped using them. They went dormant like seeds. She thought about the Project O shares sitting in that document. 40,000 shares. Vincent had dismissed them without a second look, and Vincent was not careless with money, which meant he genuinely believed there was nothing there. He had not looked closely because he had already decided. Mira had spent 15 years watching Vincent make decisions. She knew the difference between his genuine assessments and his lazy ones. He had been lazy about Project O because it fit the narrative. He already had a failed startup, a charity share, a nothing. What if he was wrong? She pulled out her phone. Her dress was soaked through, and her hair was flat against her head, and she was standing on a street corner in Manhattan at 11 at night with everything she owned in a bag that weighed less than 12 pounds, and she pulled up everything she could find about Project O in the 30 seconds before the rain shorted out her screen. She saw enough. A clean energy company, a proprietary technology related to thermal energy storage. A team of engineers who had come out of MIT and Caltech and had published work that, if Mira was reading the abstracts correctly, was not failed technology. It was failed marketing, failed leadership, failed capital management. The idea had not been broken. The execution had been. She got in a cab. She gave the driver an address in Queens. She sat in the back seat with her bag on her lap and the settlement document inside it, and 40,000 shares of something Vincent had dismissed as worthless, and she felt the dormant thing inside her turn toward the light. The apartment in Queens was small in the way that tells the truth about your circumstances. One bedroom, a window that looked at another window, heat that negotiated with the radiator on its own schedule. Mira arrived after midnight and sat on the edge of the narrow bed and looked around the room. She did not cry. She had cried in the elevator silently for exactly 4 floors, and then she had stopped because she needed her mind clear, and grief was not something she could afford in large quantities right now. She opened her laptop. She began to read. Project O had been founded 6 years ago by 2 engineers named David Park and Soren Albrecht. The technology they had developed was a modular thermal energy storage system that could retrofit existing industrial infrastructure at a fraction of the cost of conventional green upgrades. The science was genuinely novel. 3 peer-reviewed papers had confirmed it. The problem had been everything surrounding the science, a CEO who was better at fundraising than operating. A marketing campaign that had tried to appeal to consumers instead of the industrial clients who actually needed the product, a Series B round, that had been structured badly and had given too much control to investors who did not understand the technology. The company had collapsed, not because the technology failed. It had collapsed because the people running it had made every business mistake it was possible to make around something that worked. Mira read until 4 in the morning. She made notes in the margins of a legal pad in her precise, economical handwriting. She built a picture from the annual reports and the founder interviews and the technical papers and the SEC filings, and what she saw when she assembled all of it was not a dead company. It was a buried one. She slept for 3 hours. She woke at 7 and made coffee on a hot plate and kept reading. By the end of the first week in the Queen's apartment, she had a file on Project O that was 40 pages long. She had mapped the technology against current industrial demand. She had identified 3 sectors where the application was not just viable, but urgently needed. She had calculated a conservative valuation based on comparable technologies and found a number that made her sit back in her chair and breathe slowly for a moment, because it was not a small number. It was not even a medium number. She also had no money to do anything about it. The settlement covered her rent and utilities and a modest amount for food and nothing else. Her bank account had not been touched by Vincent technically, but 15 years of managing a household on an allowance rather than a salary meant there was very little in it. She had no professional contacts that weren't Vincent's contacts first. She had a gap on her resume that was 15 years long. She spent the second week applying for jobs. Not the jobs she wanted, not yet. The jobs that would let her eat while she figured out how to do what she actually needed to do. She applied to 14 financial services firms. She applied to 3 asset management companies. She updated her resume with the consulting work she had done informally over the years, the market research she had written for Vincent's board presentations, the analysis she had quietly contributed to 3 of his major acquisitions' work. She had never been credited for because it had simply been absorbed into the company's decision-making, as though it had emerged fully formed from the executive team. She received 12 rejections, 1 no response, 1 request for an interview that was canceled the morning of. She sat with the rejections and she let herself feel the weight of them for exactly 1 evening. She made tea. She sat at her small table. She read the rejection emails with the particular attention she had once given to bad quarterly reports, looking not for what they said, but for what they revealed about how she was being perceived. The picture that emerged was consistent, overqualified in title, underqualified in currency. A woman with a strong educational background and 15 years of documented absence. In a market that valued continuous credentials over accumulated intelligence, she was already behind. She almost sent another round of resumes on Thursday morning. Instead, she sat with her 40-page Project O file and her 3 years of informal market analysis work that had never had her name attached to it, and she thought about what she actually had to offer and to whom. The name that came to her was not a name she had planned on. Julian Thorne had built Thorne Enterprises from a single infrastructure fund into one of the 5 largest private asset management firms in the world. He was 44 years old, famously difficult, famously precise, and famously uninterested in the kind of professional credential theater that most of the financial industry ran on. He had been profiled 3 times in the last 5 years. Each profile had quoted him saying some version of the same thing: "I do not care where you went to school. I care whether you can see what other people cannot." Mira had read those profiles when they were published. She had filed them away in the part of her mind that noticed things without acting on them. She pulled them out now. She did not apply to Thorne Enterprises. There was no open position listed that she was remotely qualified for on paper. Instead, she did something she had watched Vincent do exactly once in the early days of his career before he had the reputation to rely on and needed something more audacious. She bypassed the application process entirely. She spent 4 days writing a market analysis. Not a resume, not a cover letter. A 20-page strategic analysis of the clean energy storage sector with a specific focus on an undervalued asset that she identified as Project O, including her valuation, her sector, mapping her growth projections, and her specific thesis for how a company with the right capital structure and the right operational leadership could take that buried technology and build something worth several $100 million. She did not include her name until the last page. She did not mention that she owned 40,000 shares of the company she was analyzing. She did not mention Vincent Hale. She sent it to Julian Thorne's direct email address, which she had found through a chain of professional connections so indirect it had taken 2 days to locate. She included a single sentence above the document: "This is what I see that the market is missing. If you agree, I would welcome 15 minutes of your time." She sent it on a Wednesday evening, and then she closed her laptop and made herself eat something, and did not check her email again until morning. There was no response on Thursday. There was no response on Friday. On Saturday morning, there was a response. It was 4 lines long. It said, "I read your analysis. Your Project O thesis is either brilliant or wrong, and I find I cannot determine which without speaking to you. Monday, 9 a.m. My assistant will send you the address." Mira read it 3 times. Then she got up, went to the window that looked at another window, and let herself feel one moment of something that was not quite triumph, but was its close relative, the feeling of a door opening in a hallway you had thought was a dead end. She pressed her palm flat against the cool glass. She thought about Vincent standing at his penthouse window looking out at a city he believed he owned, telling her she was not equipped for a fight. She thought about 40,000 shares of a buried company. She thought about Monday morning. Then she went back to her table and opened her laptop and prepared. Monday came the way significant days always do, ordinary on the surface, carrying everything underneath. Mira was on the subway by 7:45. She wore the best thing she still owned, a charcoal blazer she had bought 3 years ago for a charity luncheon pressed flat the night before with an iron she borrowed from her neighbor. She had her analysis printed and bound. She had slept 4 hours. She had rehearsed nothing because she had decided that if she walked into Julian Thorne's office performing confidence she did not have, he would see through it in 30 seconds. And she would rather be exactly what she was, and let that be enough or not enough on its own terms. The Thorne Enterprises offices occupied the top 4 floors of a building on Park Avenue that did not announce itself from the street. No logo on the exterior, no signage visible from the sidewalk, just glass and steel, and the particular silence of a building that did not need to impress anyone. Mira rode the elevator to the 38th floor and gave her name to a receptionist who looked at her with the careful neutrality of someone trained to reveal nothing. "Mr. Thorne will be with you shortly," the receptionist said. Shortly turned out to be 40 minutes. Mira sat in a chair by the window and did not check her phone. She watched the city below and thought about the 40-page file sitting in her bag and the 40,000 shares sitting in the settlement document and the particular mathematics of a moment that could either open everything or close it permanently. At 9:42, a door opened and a man walked out. Julian Thorne was not what she had expected, and she realized immediately that she had made the error of constructing him from his profiles. The profiles had described a hard man, controlled precise the kind of person who communicated primarily through the quality of his silences. What walked toward her was all of that, but also something the profiles had not captured, a quality of total attention. As though when he looked at you, he was actually looking and not performing the act of looking while thinking about something else. He was in his mid-40s, lean with dark eyes that moved across her face, and then her posture, and then the bag in her hands, with the efficiency of someone who read situations the way other people read text. He did not offer his hand immediately. He said, "You wrote the Project O analysis." "Yes," Mira said. "How long did it take you, Eb? 4 days for the research, 2 days for the writing. Where did you get the MIT thermal energy papers? They're not indexed anywhere public." "The lead author posts them to a university repository that isn't well publicized. I found it through a footnote in a trade journal from 2021. Julian Thorne looked at her for a moment with an expression she could not fully read. Then he said, "Come in." His office was large in the way that said function, not display. One wall was entirely glass. The other walls held whiteboards covered in figures and a single framed photograph that Mira did not look at long enough to identify. He sat behind his desk. She sat across from it. "Your analysis has 3 sections I found genuinely interesting," he said, "and 1 section that I think is wrong." "Which section?" she asked. "Your industrial retrofit timeline. You're projecting 18 months from capital injection to first revenue. That's optimistic by at least 6 months given the current supply chain situation for the specific components they need." Mira had thought about this. "I'd push back on that," she said. "Park and Albrecht's original design used imported components because they were cheaper at the time. If you restructure procurement around domestic suppliers in the Ohio manufacturing corridor, you actually compress the timeline. The unit cost goes up by about 9%, but the lead time drops by 30%. Julian was quiet for a moment. "You've already mapped the domestic supply chain." "It's in the appendix." He opened the bound document. He found the appendix. He read it. Mira watched his face and saw the moment he registered what she had done, not just identified the problem, but solved it before he could raise it. "Who are you?" he asked, not rudely, with genuine curiosity. "Mira Dane. I was a financial analyst before I left the industry 15 years ago." "Why did you leave?" "I got married. My husband's career took priority. That was a decision I made, and I'm not looking to relitigate it. What I am looking to do is work." 15 years is a significant gap. "It is," she said. "I won't pretend otherwise. What I will tell you is that during those 15 years, I informally contributed to 3 major acquisition analyses, 2 of which you may recognize if I give you the names, and none of which had my name attached to the final work." "Give me the names." She gave them. She watched his expression shift in a way that was almost imperceptible. Almost. "Those were Hale Capital deals," he said. "Yes." A pause. He was connecting something. She waited. "Vincent Hale," he said. "My former husband," Mira said. "We divorced 6 weeks ago. He gave me the Project O shares as part of the settlement because he believed they were worthless. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of a man reorganizing information. "You came to me with an analysis of a company whose shares you personally own," Julian said. "I disclosed that in the document, page 1, second paragraph." He looked down. He found it. His mouth moved very slightly, not quite a smile. "You did," he said. "I'm not here to hide my position. I'm here because the analysis is correct, and because I believe you're one of the few people in this market with both the capital and the operational infrastructure to do what needs to be done with that company. My shares are a rounding error relative to what this could become. I'm not here about the shares." "What are you here about?" "A job," Mira said simply. "I want to work. I want to work on this specifically, but I want to work. I have 15 years of compounded observation of how money moves and where it goes wrong, and I have the skills I had before I left, plus everything those 15 years taught me, and I am sitting across from you, because you are the one person I have found in this industry who has said publicly that you do not care about credentials. I am testing whether you meant it." Julian Thorne leaned back in his chair. He looked at her with that quality of total attention. He said nothing for long enough that a less steady person would have filled the silence. Mira did not fill it. "I meant it," he said finally. "Come back Thursday. I want you to present the Project O thesis to 2 members of my investment committee. If you can hold the room, we'll talk about what comes next." Mira took the subway back to Queens. She sat in the narrow apartment and ate a bowl of soup and did not let herself feel too much about Thursday, because Thursday had not happened yet, and she had learned in the last 6 weeks to live in the actual day she was in rather than the ones that were coming. Thursday came. The investment committee was 2 people, a woman named Patricia Osei, who ran Thorne's infrastructure division and had a reputation for asking questions that dismantled presentations, like someone disassembling a machine to find the faulty part, and a man named David Lim, who said almost nothing, but whose silences had the texture of judgment. Mira had researched both of them. She knew Patricia's published objections to clean energy investment timelines, and she knew David had passed on 2 thermal storage deals in the last 3 years. She walked in and she presented. Not from the document, from memory, from understanding, from the accumulated intelligence of 6 weeks of reading everything that existed about a company everyone else had decided was finished. She anticipated Patricia's timeline objection before it was raised and addressed it directly. She addressed David's historical skepticism about the sector by walking through exactly why the previous deals he had passed on had failed and why this one was structurally different. When she finished, Patricia looked at David. David looked at Mira. "How did you know I passed on Meridian Storage in 2022? David asked. "You were quoted in a private equity roundtable transcript that was published in an industry newsletter with a circulation of about 800 people. You said the technology was sound, but the operational DNA of the founding team was wrong. You were right. I checked Meridian's post-pass trajectory. They collapsed for exactly the reason you identified. Project O has the same technology problem, but a different founder profile. Park and Albrecht are operators, not visionaries. They failed because they had no one who could translate the engineering into capital language. That's a solvable problem." David Lim looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Patricia." Patricia said, "I know." She looked at Mira. "Julian told us to evaluate the thesis. I'm going to be honest with you. The thesis is strong. Whether we move forward on it depends on factors above my authorization level. But you should know that we see what you see." Mira rode the subway back to Queens. She sat with her coat still on because the radiator was negotiating again and let herself feel for a careful, controlled moment the particular relief of being seen accurately, of having the thing inside you recognized by people qualified to recognize it. Her phone rang 2 hours later. Julian. "Patricia and David recommended moving forward on the Project O assessment," he said. "I want you on the team, not as a contractor, as a strategic consultant with a defined scope and compensation commensurate with the role. My HR team will send you the terms tomorrow." "All right," Mira said. "One more thing," he said. "How many shares do you hold?" 40,000. "Don't sell them," Julian said. "Not yet," and he ended the call. She sat in the quiet apartment in Queens with her phone in her hand and the radiator making its sounds and the window looking at another window, and she breathed slowly and steadily and let the fact of what had just happened settle into her body like something real. The first day at Thorne Enterprises, she arrived at 8 and left at 10:30 at night. The second day the same. By the end of the first week, she understood the rhythm of the place, which was not the rhythm of any firm she had worked at before, and which suited her in ways she could not have predicted. Julian ran his operation like a controlled experiment. Everything was questioned. Everything was tested. He did not accept conclusions without methodology, and he did not accept methodology without having someone in the room whose job was specifically to find the flaw in it. He put Mira in that role instinctively, almost before she understood that was what she was doing. She was sitting in a Monday briefing in the third week when she heard herself dismantle a junior analyst's infrastructure model in 4 sentences and watched Julian's face across the table and saw the thing she had seen in their first meeting, that quality of recognition, and understood that she was not being managed here. She was being used at her actual capacity. The sensation was so unfamiliar it took her several days to name it. The project. Work began in earnest in her 5th week. Julian assigned her a team of 3, a young engineer named Sam, who understood the technology better than almost anyone outside of Park and Albrecht themselves. A capital markets specialist named Rhea, who could structure a deal in her sleep, and a communications strategist named Finn, who had rebuilt the brand narrative of 2 failed companies and turned them into acquisition targets. Mira ran the team. She had not run a team since before her marriage, and she discovered that the 15 years had not diminished that particular skill. It had deepened it. She called David Park on a Tuesday morning. He picked up after 2 rings. "Mr. Park," she said, "my name is Mira Dane. I'm a strategic consultant at Thorne Enterprises. I'd like to talk to you about Project O." A pause. "How did you get this number?" "Soren Albrecht's sister works in our building. She's in facilities management. She gave it to me because I asked her to, and because I told her what I wanted to do with your company." Another pause, longer this time. "What do you want to do with our company?" "Rebuild it," Mira said. "Correctly this time. I've read everything. I know what went wrong. I know it wasn't the technology. I want 45 minutes of your time, and if after 45 minutes you don't think I'm right, I'll leave you alone." David Park said, "Thursday afternoon, I'll send you an address." She met him and Soren Albrecht in a small office in Brooklyn that still had boxes in the corner from a move that had happened 8 months ago. They were both in their late 30s. They looked like men who had been defeated in a specific way that had not yet resolved into either bitterness or acceptance. They looked at her with the careful wariness of people who had been through due diligence processes that had ended badly. She presented for 40 minutes. She did not use slides. She talked through the technology, through the market, through the failure points, through the restructuring thesis. She watched their faces change as she spoke, watched the wariness give way to something more alert, watched Soren lean forward in his chair at the point where she laid out the domestic supply chain restructuring. When she finished, David Park said, "You understand what we built?" "Yes," Mira said. "The last 3 firms that came to us talked about the company like it was a distressed asset to be harvested. You're talking about it like it's a company." "It is a company. It's just been managed by people who didn't understand what they had." Soren Albrecht said, "How did you find us?" "This isn't a high-profile situation anymore. We're not exactly news." Mira said, "Someone gave me your shares because he thought they were worthless. I looked at what I'd been given, and I saw something different." She paused. "I have a personal stake in being right about this." The 2 men looked at each other. Something passed between them that was too private to interpret. David said, "What does Thorne want in return?" "Majority operational control for 3 years with a defined exit structure that returns voting equity to you and Soren based on performance benchmarks. Julian's team will handle the capital and the infrastructure. Your team handles the technology and the product. I will handle the translation between the 2 sides." "Translation," Soren said. "What you have is a language problem as much as a capital problem. The technology speaks engineering. The market speaks money. Nobody has been in the middle making them understand each other. That's the job I'm describing." David Park looked at her steadily. "You said someone gave you the shares because he thought they were worthless." "Yes." "Does he know what you're doing with them?" Mira looked back at him with equal steadiness. "Not yet," she said. Meanwhile, in a different part of the city, in a penthouse 41 floors above street level, Vincent Hale was having a bad quarter. It had started with Camilla. She had expensive taste in the absolute non-negotiable way of someone who had never been told no by anyone with real money, and Vincent had found in the first months that indulging her was not pleasure so much as performance, each gift a proof of his continuing relevance in her life. He had bought her an apartment in Tribeca. He had funded a fashion line she wanted to launch that had a logo but no operational plan. He had introduced her to his social circle and watched the introduction backfire when she said something at a dinner that revealed she did not understand the basic mechanics of the business his reputation was built on. And he had seen the look pass around the table and had felt for the first time in a long time something he did not have a comfortable name for. His general counsel had flagged something in the third month, a clause in a licensing agreement from 4 years ago that had been overlooked during a routine contract review. The clause had implications for 3 of his current operating agreements. The legal exposure was not catastrophic, but it was not nothing, and it would require expensive maneuvering to resolve, and the timing was wrong because 2 of his major investors were already edgy about the quarter's performance numbers. He had told Marcus to handle it and had not thought about it again. That had been a mistake. In the 5th week of Mira's work at Thorne Enterprises, Vincent received a call from one of his board members that lasted 11 minutes and left him standing at his window with the phone still in his hand after the call ended. The licensing issue had not been handled. It had been deferred, and deferral had allowed it to metastasize into something that now touched the company's core operating structure in ways that his general counsel's email arriving 40 minutes after the board call made clear were going to be expensive to fix, not just financially, structurally. He called Marcus. Marcus did not pick up. He called his general counsel. She answered and used words like exposure and remediation and timeline that turned the space behind his eyes into a flat white pressure. He went to find Camilla. She was on the phone when he arrived at the Tribeca apartment, laughing at something sitting cross-legged on the couch he had paid for with a posture of total ease. She looked up when he came in, and she did not end the call. He stood in the doorway of the apartment he was paying for and looked at the woman who was his future, and felt the first cold current of something moving in a direction he did not control. Back in Queens, Mira was working until midnight again. Sam had sent revised engineering specs. Rhea had a draft capital structure that needed her notes. Finn had 3 brand concepts that she needed to review before the morning. She sat at the small table with her laptop and her legal pad and her cold coffee, and she worked. The apartment was quiet. The radiator had finally given up its argument for the evening. She could hear faintly the sound of the city doing what the city always did. She thought briefly about where she had been 10 weeks ago, standing in the rain on a street corner with everything she owned in a 12-pound bag. She thought about the settlement document and the line item that had looked like an afterthought. She thought about Vincent dropping her wedding photo into the trash and telling her the past gets nothing. She thought about 40,000 shares and what they were going to be worth when this was finished. Then she turned back to her screen and kept working because the thinking was not the point. The work was the point. The work had always been the point. She had simply been kept for 15 years from doing it. At 11:53 on a Friday night, Julian sent her a single message. It said, "The committee approved full capital deployment for Project O restructuring. Announcement goes out Monday. You should know you built this." Mira read it once. She set the phone face down on the table. She pressed both palms flat against the surface the way you press your hands against something solid when you need to feel that it is real. She stayed like that for a long moment. Then she picked up her pen and went back to work. The Monday announcement went out at 7 in the morning, and by 9 the financial press had picked it up. Thorne Enterprises had acquired controlling operational interest in a clean energy storage company, formerly known as Project O, now rebranded under the name Obsidian Energy. The announcement was precise and spare in the way that Julian preferred all public communications, 3 paragraphs, no superlatives heavy on specifics. Capital deployment figure. Technology application sectors. 3 named industrial partners who had already signed letters of intent. The rebranding was explained in a single sentence. The company's technology had been proven sound, and its leadership restructured to reflect its actual potential. Mira read it on her phone on the subway and felt nothing dramatic. What she felt was quieter than drama. It was the particular satisfaction of a calculation that had resolved correctly. She put her phone in her pocket and watched the tunnel walls go by and breathed. By the time she reached the office, her inbox had 47 messages. 12 were from people she did not know congratulating Thorne Enterprises on the acquisition. 8 were from industry contacts who had somehow found her email address and wanted to know more. 3 were from journalists. 1 was from Patricia Osei, who wrote only "Clean work, Dane." 1 was from David Park, who wrote "Soren cried a little." "Don't tell him I told you." She smiled at that one. She saved it. The one she did not expect came at 11:23. It was from an address she recognized because she had seen it at the top of emails for 15 years. The subject line was blank. The body contained 4 words: "What did you do?" She stared at Vincent's email for a long time. Not because she was afraid of it, because she was measuring it. 4 words from a man who used language like a precision instrument, who never sent a message without knowing exactly what he wanted it to accomplish. 4 words with no punctuation. That told her everything she needed to know about the state he was in when he wrote them. She did not respond. She closed the email and went to her 9 o'clock meeting. That meeting was a full team session, and it ran for 3 hours. Sam walked through the revised engineering deployment schedule. Rhea presented the capital drawdown structure for the first 18 months. Finn unveiled the complete rebrand, the new name, the visual identity, the narrative framework that would be used across all investor communications and industry press. Mira sat at the head of the table and listened, and asked the questions that needed asking, and made the decisions that needed making, and felt with each hour that passed the growing certainty of something she had not felt in a very long time. She felt capable, not competent, not merely functional, genuinely fully capable in the way that happens when a person is finally working at the level their mind was built for. Julian came in at the 2-hour mark, sat in the corner, and said nothing for 40 minutes. He watched. She knew he was watching, and she did not adjust her behavior for his presence, which she understood instinctively was the right choice. When the meeting ended and the team filed out, he stayed. "The industrial partner outreach," he said. "You already have a 4th letter of intent pending." "Crestline Manufacturing," she said. "I reached out to their VP of operations 3 weeks ago. They're moving slower than the others, but they'll close." "How do you know?" "Because their Q3 earnings call had a specific language shift around energy cost management. They went from using the phrase exploring options to committed to structural reduction. That's not a communications change. That's a board-level directive that got handed down and landed in the earnings script. They have to move now. They just need the right conversation." She paused. "I have that conversation scheduled for Thursday." Julian looked at her. "You've been doing this for 11 weeks. "Yes." "Where were you 10 years ago?" The question was not unkind. It had the texture of genuine puzzlement. Mira considered the honest answer, which was, "I was managing a household for a man who told me my contribution was invisible, and I believed him long enough that it became a kind of truth." She did not say that. What she said was, "Somewhere I shouldn't have been. I'm here now." Julian accepted that with a single nod and stood. At the door, he turned back. "The Obsidian Gala is in 8 weeks. Thorne Enterprises has a table. Obsidian Energy will be formally presented to the industry at the event. I want you there." "All right," she said. "As the architect of the deal," he said. "Not as support staff, as the person who built this." She met his eyes. "I understand." He left. She turned back to her screen and pulled up the Crestline Manufacturing earnings call transcript and began preparing for Thursday. What happened next happened the way important things often happen, not in one dramatic moment, but in a series of small disclosures that assembled themselves into something enormous. It was Rhea who brought the first piece. She came into Mira's office on a Wednesday afternoon with a look on her face that was carefully neutral in the way that careful neutrality signals the opposite of nothing. "I need to show you something," Rhea said. She put a document on the desk. "This came through our legal team this morning. Routine due diligence sweep on the Project O acquisition. They pulled everything, all historical filings, all prior agreements." She pointed to a specific paragraph on the 3rd page. "This is a licensing agreement from 4 years ago. It covers the thermal storage patent portfolio. The original agreement was between Project O and a holding company called Meridian Capital Partners. Mira looked at the paragraph. She looked at the name of the holding company. Something moved in the back of her mind, a recognition she couldn't immediately locate. Meridian Capital Partners, she said. Who owns it? Rhea looked at her steadily. It's a shell company, 3 layers deep, but our legal team traced it. She paused. It's a Hale Capital subsidiary. The room went very quiet. Mira looked at the document. She read the paragraph twice, then the full page, then the 2 pages surrounding it. She understood what she was looking at. The licensing agreement had been structured to give Meridian Capital Partners, the Hale Capital subsidiary, first right of refusal on any acquisition of the Project O patent portfolio above a certain valuation threshold. The threshold was a number that had been set 4 years ago, when the company was worth almost nothing, a number that was now far below the current valuation. Vincent had not given away the shares carelessly. He had given away the shares because he had believed the first right of refusal clause would protect him. He had believed that if Project O ever became valuable, he would have the contractual right to step in ahead of any acquirer and claim the patents. Except the clause had never been disclosed to Thorne Enterprises during the settlement process. Because it was buried in a subsidiary agreement that Vincent's legal team had apparently assumed would never surface. Because Vincent had assumed, as he assumed everything, that the situation was under his control. Does Julian know? Mira asked. I came to you first, Rhea said. Mira picked up her phone and called Julian directly. He answered on the second ring. She told him what Rhea had found. She read him the specific paragraph. She waited through his silence. Send it to my legal team in the next 10 minutes, he said. His voice was perfectly even. Then come to my office. She went to his office. His general counsel, a sharp, compact woman named Eleanor Voss, who Mira had spoken to twice before, was already there. Eleanor had the document on her tablet and was reading it with the focused efficiency of someone identifying a structural problem before deciding how to fix it. The good news, Eleanor said, not looking up, is that this clause has a specific condition of enforceability. It requires that the party holding the right of refusal be in good standing with respect to all prior agreements with the company. Our team found this morning that Meridian Capital Partners stopped making the annual maintenance payments required under the same agreement 18 months ago. She looked up. The clause is void. They defaulted on the condition that would have made it enforceable. Mira absorbed that. Vincent's team didn't catch that. Apparently not, Eleanor said, which means he believes he still has leverage he does not actually have. Julian, who had been standing at his window with his back to the room, turned around. He'll figure it out, he said. When the deal becomes fully public at the gala, he'll have his team review it, and they'll find the void clause, and then they'll find that they already defaulted on it. He looked at Mira. How do you want to handle that? Mira thought about 4 words with no punctuation. What did you do? She thought about a man who had handed her a settlement document and told her the past gets nothing. She thought about 15 years of invisible work and a wedding photo in a trash can. We handle it the way we handle everything, she said. Correctly, transparently, with full documentation. If he comes at us legally, Eleanor's team responds. If he comes at me personally, that's his problem. She paused. I'm not interested in revenge. I'm interested in what's ours. Julian looked at her for a moment. All right, he said. Eleanor closed her tablet. I'll prepare the response framework. The Thursday meeting with Crestline Manufacturing ran for 2 hours and closed exactly as Mira had projected. Their VP of operations was a man named Gerald Huang, who had done his homework and arrived with specific technical questions that Sam, who Mira had brought along, answered with the kind of depth that does not come from presentation prep. It comes from understanding. Gerald Huang recognized it, and his posture changed in the middle of the meeting. The particular shift of someone who has been skeptical long enough and has now decided. They signed the letter of intent before lunch. On the subway back, Sam said, "How did you know he'd sign today?" "I didn't know," Mira said. "I prepared as if he would. There's a difference." Sam thought about that for the rest of the ride. Meanwhile, across the city, Vincent Hale was having a conversation with his general counsel that was not going well. The licensing exposure that had been flagged 3 months ago had not resolved. It had escalated. 2 of his operating agreements were now in active dispute. His legal costs for the quarter were running at 3 times the projection. And Camilla, who had never been patient with problems she could not solve by spending money, had begun making comments that had the specific edge of someone reassessing their situation. She said at dinner on the Thursday without looking up from her phone, "I heard Thorne Enterprises announced a big clean energy deal this week." "Yes," Vincent said. "Some woman named Mira Dane is behind it, apparently. The press is calling her the architect." She looked up. "Isn't that your ex-wife's name?" Vincent set down his fork. Camilla watched his face. "It is, isn't it?" He said nothing. "The stock they acquired," Camilla said, with the particular tone of someone who has already done the research and is waiting to see if you'll lie about it, "was Project O. Wasn't that in your divorce settlement? Didn't you give her those shares?" "It was worthless," Vincent said. His voice came out wrong, flat in the wrong places. "It doesn't look worthless now," Camilla said. She picked up her phone again. "The analysts are projecting the rebranded company at somewhere between 3 and 400 million in the next 18 months. She set the phone face up on the table between them, the screen visible the way he had done to Mira, with the photo of Camilla on a yacht. Neither of them acknowledged the symmetry. Vincent looked at this number on the screen. He looked at it for a long time. Something was moving behind his eyes, a reorganization, a recalculation. The particular motion of a mind that is discovering it made a significant error and is trying to find the point at which the error occurred. "I need to make a call," he said. He stood from the table. "Finish your dinner first," Camilla said. He did not finish his dinner. He called his general counsel at 9 o'clock that night. He told her to pull everything related to Project O. Every filing, every prior agreement, every document that had touched the company during its relationship with any Hale Capital entity. She told him she would have a team on it in the morning. The morning report was not what he expected. She called him at 7:45. Her voice had the particular flatness of someone delivering information they know is going to land badly. "The first right of refusal clause is void," she said. "Meridian defaulted on the maintenance payment 18 months ago. The clause lost enforceability at that point." Vincent was quiet. "I should have caught it," she said. "That's on my team, and I take responsibility for it. But the practical result is that we have no legal standing to challenge the Thorne acquisition of the patent portfolio." "Who knew about the default?" he asked. His voice was very controlled. "It's unclear. It may have been an administrative oversight. The payments were coming through the subsidiary's accounting, and it's possible no one at the parent level was monitoring it." "Find out," he said. "Vincent." Her voice shifted slightly. "There's something else." He waited. "The shares that were included in the divorce settlement. The Project O shares. At current projected valuation, the 40,000 shares are worth approximately $14 million. The silence that followed was not the silence of a man processing information. It was the silence of a man standing very still at the edge of something and understanding for the first time how far down it goes. He had given her $14 million and called it a parting gift. He had stood at his window and told her she was not equipped for a fight. Mira was in her office when the second email arrived. No subject line again. 2 sentences this time. "I know what you've built. We need to talk." She read it. She thought about responding for approximately 30 seconds. Then she forwarded it to Eleanor Voss with a single line for the file and went back to work. The gala was 6 weeks away. There was a full Obsidian Energy Board presentation to prepare. There was the Crestline partnership to formalize. There was a 5th industrial partner in early conversation that Rio was managing. There was a press strategy to finalize with Finn. There was everything that needed to happen before a public room full of the most attentive eyes in the industry turned toward a woman they had never heard of, and a company they had written off and had to understand in 30 seconds that both of them were real. Mira worked. She worked the way she had always worked when the work was worth it, which was without watching the clock, without measuring the hours, against a standard of what was reasonable with the full force of everything she had. She stayed until 10 most nights. She was in before 8 most mornings. She ran the team with the precision of someone who had spent 15 years observing how organizations succeed and fail from the inside, who had watched Vincent make every mistake of ego that a leader can make, and had cataloged them quietly, and was now applying the inverse of each one. She did not make decisions without explaining her reasoning. She did not dismiss questions from the junior members of the team. She did not take credit individually for work that had been collective. She was not performing these qualities. They were simply how she operated when no one was telling her how to operate. Sam noticed first. He said in the middle of a working lunch, "You've done this before." "Done what?" she said. "Run something. Led people." He was looking at her with the particular attention of someone young enough to still be learning what good leadership looks like and old enough to recognize it. "You've been here 3 months, and the team runs like you've been here 3 years. "I've been watching people lead things for a long time," she said. "Some of them were very good at it. I paid attention. And the ones who weren't good at it." She thought about Vincent in a boardroom, dismissing a junior analyst's concern with a single cold look, the look that communicated that the concern was not wrong so much as irrelevant. She thought about what that had cost him over time, the slow attrition of people willing to tell him the truth. "I paid even more attention to those," she said. 4 weeks before the gala, something shifted in the press. Finn brought it to her attention on a Tuesday. A financial journalist named Kieran Walsh had been writing a profile on Julian Thorne and had, in the course of his research, begun pulling the thread of the Obsidian Energy deal. He had connected Mira's name to the acquisition. He had connected Mira's name to Vincent Hale. He had not published anything yet, but Finn had a contact at the publication who had told him the piece was moving. "What's the angle?" Mira asked. "From what I can tell," Finn said carefully, "it's a redemption narrative. Discarded wife uses settlement assets to build a rival empire. That kind of thing." Mira looked at him steadily. "Is that what we are, a redemption narrative?" Finn held her gaze. "That's what I want to ask you. Because if that's how this gets framed, it changes the public story of Obsidian Energy from a legitimate business achievement into a personal drama, and that affects how the industry receives it." She thought about that for a moment. "Call Walsh," she said. "Tell him I'll give him 30 minutes before the gala. Tell him the story he wants to tell is less interesting than the actual story." "What's the actual story?" "A company with revolutionary technology that was mismanaged into the ground and then correctly rebuilt by people who understood what it was actually worth." She paused. "The personal element is real, but it's not the point. The point is what the work is. If Walsh is a good journalist, he'll understand the difference." Finn made the call. Walsh agreed to the 30 minutes. Mira went back to her desk. She had a board presentation to build and a Crestline partnership closing document to review, and a fifth industrial partner that Rhea said was now moving faster than expected. She had 6 weeks until a room full of the most powerful people in her industry would look at her and form a judgment. She was not afraid of the judgment. She had done the work. The work would speak. What she felt sitting at her desk on that Tuesday afternoon with the city moving its vast, indifferent life outside her window was something she had not felt in a very long time, something she had quietly stopped expecting. She felt ready. And 3 floors below in the building's lobby, a man in an expensive coat stood looking at the elevator bank with his hands in his pockets and his jaw set in the particular way of someone who has decided to do something he knows is a mistake. Vincent Hale had told his driver to wait. He had told his assistant he would be 20 minutes. He had taken the elevator to the lobby of Thorne Enterprises and stood there for 4 minutes before the security desk called up. The call went to Julian's assistant. The assistant walked to Julian's office. Julian listened, then picked up his own phone and called Eleanor Voss. "Vincent Hale is in the lobby," he said. Eleanor said, "Do not let him up." "I wasn't going to," Julian said. "Send him a letter. Make it formal. Make it clear." Downstairs, after 6 minutes, the security desk informed Vincent Hale that no one in the building was available to meet with him today and that any further contact should be directed to Thorne Enterprises' legal counsel. They handed him a business card with Eleanor Voss's direct line. Vincent looked at the card. He looked at the elevator bank. He stood very still for a moment in the lobby of a building he could not enter, holding the business card of a lawyer who had already seen everything he had and found it insufficient. Then he put the card in his pocket and walked back out into the street. His driver was waiting. He got in. He said nothing for the entire ride back. The business card sat on Vincent's desk for 3 days without being touched. He walked past it each morning. He sat across from it during calls. He looked at it the way you look at a thing you are not ready to name, yet something that represents a change in the landscape so fundamental that acknowledging it means reorganizing everything you understood about the terrain. Eleanor Voss, Thorne Enterprises General Counsel. A direct line he had been handed by a security guard in a lobby he had not been permitted to enter. He had built his career on access, on being the person who moved through rooms, who was recognized at doors, who never waited. The lobby of Thorne Enterprises had been the first door in 20 years that had not opened for him. He kept returning to it in his mind, not with humility, but with the particular fury of a man trying to locate the mechanical error that had produced an impossible result. On the 4th day, he called his own attorney, a man named Robert Fain, who had handled Hale Capital's legal work for 11 years, and who had the careful manner of someone who delivered difficult information by surrounding it with so much context that by the time the actual news arrived, you had already processed half of it. "The void clause situation," Vincent said. "Give me options." Robert was quiet for a moment. "Vincent, I've spent the last 2 weeks looking at this from every angle. The Meridian default is clean. There's no ambiguity in the language of the agreement. The right of refusal lapsed 18 months ago, and Thorne's acquisition is fully protected. There has to be something." "There isn't. Not on the patent side." Another pause. "There's something else I need to tell you, and I want you to hear it before it reaches you another way." Vincent said nothing. He waited. "The licensing dispute with your 2 operating agreements, the one Eleanor's team flagged 3 months ago. I've been doing a deeper review, and I found something that wasn't in the original flag. One of the agreements contains an indemnification clause that was drafted in a way that creates personal liability for the signatory in the event of a breach." Robert's voice stayed careful and even. "You signed that agreement personally, not as a corporate officer, as an individual." "What does that mean in practical terms?" "It means that if the breach is proven, the liability doesn't stop at the company level. It comes to you." The silence on Vincent's end lasted long enough that Robert said his name once quietly to confirm he was still there. "How exposed?" Vincent asked. "The figure our team is projecting conservatively is somewhere between 40 and 70 million. Vincent put the phone down on his desk without ending the call. He sat very still. He could hear Robert's voice, small and distant, continuing to speak. He did not pick the phone back up for almost 2 minutes. When he did, he said, "Fix it." "I'm working on it," Robert said. "But I need you to understand that the window for a negotiated resolution is closing. The opposing counsel has been patient because they believed we were moving toward settlement. If we continue to delay, they move to formal litigation, and the personal liability question becomes a matter of public record." "How long do I have?" 3 weeks, maybe 4. Vincent ended the call. He looked at Eleanor Voss's business card. He looked at it for a long time. Then he picked it up and put it in his desk drawer face down and told himself he was not there yet. The Obsidian Gala was in 5 weeks. The name had always carried weight in the industry, an annual event that functioned less as a celebration and more as a public accounting. The place where the year's significant moves in finance, energy, and infrastructure were formally recognized in front of the people whose recognition meant something. Invitations were extended by the organizing committee, and they were not applied for. Either you were on the list or you were not. And whether you were on the list depended entirely on whether the committee considered your year's work worthy of the room. Vincent had attended for 14 consecutive years. His invitation had always arrived in September, a heavy cream envelope, his name in embossed ink. He had built deals at the gala. He had made alliances at the gala. He had stood in that room and felt the particular electricity of being seen by people whose sight conferred legitimacy. His September envelope had not arrived. He waited a week past the date it typically came. He had his assistant call the committee's office professionally with the tone of a scheduling inquiry rather than a concern. His assistant reported back that Mr. Hale was not on the current guest list for this year's event. Vincent sat with that information and did not share it with anyone. Camilla noticed the envelope's absence because she had been anticipating the gala since July. She had already commissioned a dress. She brought it up on a Sunday morning in the way she brought up everything she wanted, not as a request, but as an established fact, awaiting logistical confirmation. "We need to sort out the table arrangement for the gala," she said. "I want to be near the Hartwell group this year. Last year we were too far from the center." "We're not going this year," Vincent said. Camilla looked up from her coffee. "What do you mean we're not going?" "The invitation situation is being handled." "Being handled means it hasn't arrived." She set her cup down. Her voice had taken on the particular edge he had been hearing more frequently in the last 2 months, the edge of someone recalibrating what they had agreed to. "Vincent, the gala is the event. If we're not there this year, people will notice." "I'm aware of that." "Then fix it." "I said it's being handled," he said, and his voice was sharper than he intended it to be, and she heard the sharpness, and her eyes went cool. "Don't speak to me like that," she said. He looked at her across the table. He looked at the dress she had commissioned. He looked at the life she was living in the apartment he was paying for, and the fashion line that had a logo and no revenue, and the social calendar that ran entirely on his reputation and his access. He had told Mira she was a product of a certain period of his life. He did not examine whether the reverse might also be true. "I'll handle the gala," he said. "Don't worry about it." He called in a favor from a board member of the organizing committee, a man named Peterson, who owed him something from 3 years back. Peterson was uncomfortable on the phone in the way that men are uncomfortable when they are about to disappoint someone they owe. He said the committee's list was finalized. He said there were capacity constraints this year. He said he would see what he could do, and his tone communicated that he would not be able to do anything. Vincent understood. He had used that tone himself enough times to recognize it on the other end. He was not on the list because the committee had made a decision about what this year's gala represented. And what this year's gala represented, apparently, was not him. 3 weeks before the event, Finn's contact at the publication sent a heads up. Walsh's profile was going to press. The piece had shifted substantially from the redemption narrative angle. It was now a straight business profile, technical, precise, focused on the Obsidian Energy deal and the strategic intelligence that had driven it. Mira Dane was named as the architect. Her background was described accurately. Her 15-year gap was mentioned once and contextualized without drama. The piece did not mention Vincent by name. It referred once to prior ownership of the relevant assets having passed through a divorce settlement. That was all. Finn showed her the advance copy on a Thursday and watched her face while she read it. "He understood," she said when she finished. She meant Walsh understood the difference between the personal story and the actual story. "This is good work." "It runs Monday," Finn said, 2 weeks before the gala. "Good timing," she said, not calculating it as strategy, simply acknowledging that it was true. The piece ran Monday. By Wednesday, it had been cited in 4 industry publications and 2 financial news aggregators. By Friday, Mira had received 11 meeting requests from people she had never spoken to, including 2 from companies that were potential Obsidian Energy clients and 1 from a sovereign wealth fund that Rhea had been trying to get in front of for 6 weeks. Julian forwarded her the sovereign wealth fund inquiry with a single line, "This is because of you. Handle it however you think is right." She handled it. She set the meeting for the week after the gala. The same Monday, the Walsh profile ran. Vincent's phone started doing something it had not done before. It got quieter, not dramatically. The calls that had been coming regularly, the check-ins from investors, the informal conversations with board adjacents, the social feelers that formed the connective tissue of a certain kind of professional life, those calls did not stop. They thinned. The interval between them lengthened. The ones that did come had a different texture, more careful, more brief, less forthcoming with the information that people share when they consider you fully inside the circle. He noticed. He was too intelligent not to notice. He sat with it and tried to determine whether he was reading it accurately or constructing a narrative from anxiety, and he could not fully resolve the question, which was itself information. Camilla noticed the phone quieter too. She did not comment on it directly. What she did instead was begin spending more time with a group of friends that she had met independently of Vincent, people whose connection to her was not mediated through him. She mentioned one of them at dinner, a man named Theo, who worked in tech venture capital. She mentioned him in the way you mention someone you want the other person to ask about. Vincent did not ask. 2 weeks before the gala, Eleanor Voss sent a formal letter to Robert Fane. The letter was 11 paragraphs. It covered the void clause, the default on the maintenance payments, the full acquisition timeline of the Obsidian Energy patent portfolio, and the legal framework establishing that no prior claim held any enforceable standing against the Thorn acquisition. The last 3 paragraphs addressed the indemnification clause situation in Vincent's operating agreements not as a threat, but as information. Eleanor had done her homework, and her letter demonstrated it in a way that left no interpretive room. Robert called Vincent the same afternoon. "I've read the Voss letter," he said, "and it's airtight." Robert paused. "Vincent, I have to advise you clearly. Any legal action against Thorn Enterprises or Obsidian Energy will fail. The cost of pursuing it will be significant. The public nature of a failed action will compound the reputational situation you're already managing. And the indemnification exposure on your operating agreements is real, and it is moving toward litigation with or without your action against Thorn. You need to prioritize correctly." Define prioritize correctly. Settle the operating agreement dispute, quickly and quietly. Pay what needs to be paid, and step away from the Obsidian situation entirely. A beat. "I know that's not what you want to hear." "No," Vincent said. "It isn't." "I know." Robert's voice was careful and direct, in the way that people are direct when they have been paid enough to be honest. "But I would not be doing my job if I told you anything else." Vincent ended the call. He sat alone and let the shape of his situation assemble itself in his mind without the interference of pride, which was the first time he had done that in months. The picture that emerged was not catastrophic. Not yet. The indemnification exposure was serious, but survivable if addressed directly. The reputational thinning was uncomfortable but recoverable if he handled the next several months carefully. The gala exclusion was humiliating, but it was 1 year. He had been in this industry long enough to know that 1 bad year was not a verdict. What was not recoverable, what sat at the center of the picture like a fixed point that could not be redrawn, was the Project O situation. He had given away something worth hundreds of millions because he had not looked at it carefully enough. He had looked at it through the filter of what he had already decided it was, and he had not questioned that filter, and that error had cost him in a way that could not be monetized back. The money was not even the real cost. The real cost was the understanding that he had been wrong in the most fundamental way, not tactically wrong, strategically wrong about what he was looking at, wrong about who he was dealing with. He had looked at Mira and seen a woman who was finished. He had been so certain of it that certainty itself had become the error. He sat with that for a long time. The night before the gala, Mira was still in the office at 9. Sam had gone home at 7. Rhea at 7:30. Finn at 8. She was alone with the board presentation and the revised talking points and the strategic overview document that would be distributed to industry attendees. She read through each section with the particular attention she gave to things that were going to be seen by people whose sight conferred legitimacy. She thought about the room she would walk into tomorrow. She had looked up the seating arrangement. She knew who was attending. She knew where the Thorn Enterprises table was positioned, at the center of the room, the placement given to the event's most significant participants. She knew what the program listed for the evening's main presentation. Julian had called her that afternoon. "How are you feeling about tomorrow?" he asked. "Ready," she said. "You know it's going to be a significant room." "I know." "There's something I should tell you." His voice was measured. "The organizing committee's seating chart came through this morning. Vincent Hale is attending. He's at table 19. Mira processed that. Table 19 was near the service entrance. It was the table given to people who had been included out of historical obligation rather than current relevance. She knew that room and she knew that table, and she understood exactly what it communicated. "All right," she said. "Does that change anything for you?" She considered the question honestly. She thought about a man she had loved, genuinely loved, who had swept her life off a desk and dropped her wedding photo in the trash and told her not to be bitter. She thought about the feeling of standing in rain on a street corner with a 12-pound bag and 40,000 shares of something everyone had already decided was nothing. "No," she said. "It doesn't change anything." "Good," Julian said. "I'll see you tomorrow." She put the phone down and went back to the presentation. She read it through one more time from the beginning. She made 2 small edits. She saved it. She turned off her desk lamp. She sat for a moment in the quiet of the empty office, with the city outside the window doing what it always did. She thought about what the room would feel like tomorrow, when the lights shifted and the program moved to its centerpiece. She thought about standing at a podium in front of the industry that had not seen her for 15 years. She thought about the particular quality of a moment when everything you have built in private becomes visible in public all at once. She was not afraid of it. She picked up her bag. She turned off the office light. She walked to the elevator and rode it down, and stepped out into the night air and walked to the subway that would take her back to Queens, where she would sleep for 6 hours and wake at 5 and begin preparing for the most important day of everything she had built since the night a man swept her life off a desk and told her she was replaceable. Tomorrow, the room would see what she had made. And somewhere across the city, in an apartment in Tribeca that he was paying for, Vincent Hale was getting dressed for a gala where he had secured a seat at table 19 through a favor he had spent 2 weeks calling in a table near the service entrance, a table that meant something specific to everyone in that room who understood the language of tables. He put on his best suit. He adjusted his cufflinks. He looked at himself in the mirror with the expression of a man preparing for something he had not yet admitted to himself. He was dreading. His phone buzzed. A message from Camilla. She was not coming. She had a previous commitment she had forgotten to mention. She sent 3 words and a punctuation mark and nothing that resembled an explanation. He read the message. He set the phone down. He finished adjusting his cufflinks. He called his driver. He went downstairs. He got in the car. The gala was in 4 hours. The city moved past the car windows in its ordinary, indifferent way, and Vincent Hale rode through it toward a room where everything was about to become clear. The car dropped Mira at the entrance at 7:45. She had arrived early deliberately. She wanted to walk into the room before it filled to feel the space without the weight of 100 pairs of eyes in it, to let her body settle into the reality of where she was, before the evening made its demands. She wore a deep sapphire dress that Rhea had pushed her toward 3 weeks ago, and that she had initially resisted because it was not the kind of thing she had worn in her previous life. That was exactly why Rhea had pushed. The necklace Julian had sent to her office that afternoon with a card that said, "Only you built this. Wear it like you know that." It was sapphire and platinum and worth more than 3 months of the Queen's apartment rent, and she wore it the way Julian had instructed, like she knew. She checked in at the registration desk. The woman at the desk looked at her name, looked at her face, and said with genuine warmth, "Ms. Dane, we've been looking forward to having you." Not the practiced warmth of professional courtesy, the real kind. Mira thanked her and walked into the ballroom. The room was set for 300. The Thorne Enterprises table was positioned exactly where Julian had described center floor, close enough to the stage that the sight lines were direct. She found her seat and stood beside it for a moment and looked at the room the way she had looked at financial documents for the last 7 months, not for what it displayed on the surface, but for what its structure revealed. She had been in this room before. She had attended this gala 6 times as Vincent Hale's wife, always on his arm, always introduced as his wife, always seated at his table, always peripheral to the real conversations happening around her. She had smiled and listened and observed and said the right things and gone home and said nothing about what she had actually noticed. She had been furniture, elegant, well-placed furniture that made the room look complete without contributing to any of its actual decisions. She was not furniture tonight. Julian arrived at 8 with 2 members of his executive team and found her already seated and working through the program notes. He sat across from her and looked at her with the expression she had come to recognize as his version of approval, not demonstrative, but real. "You look like you own the room," he said. "Not yet," she said. "Give it 2 hours." He almost smiled. Patricia and David Lim arrived next. Then Rhea, then Sam, who had never attended anything like this and was managing his nerves by being extremely precise about where he placed his water glass. Finn arrived last 7 minutes before the program was due to begin and sat down and immediately began scanning the room with the professional attention of someone whose job was to read how things were being perceived. "Table 4 is the Hartwell Group," Finn said quietly, leaning toward Mira. "They've been watching this table since we sat down." "I know," Mira said. Table 11 is 3 members of the Clean Energy Investment Consortium that passed on Project O in 2021. I know that too. Finn looked at her. You're not nervous at all, are you? I'm extremely nervous, she said. I'm just not letting it run the evening. Across the room near the corridor that led to the service area, Vincent Hale found his seat at table 19. He had known what table 19 meant before he arrived, and knowing it had not made arriving at it easier. He stood beside his chair for a moment and did not sit immediately performing a brief survey of the room with the practiced ease of a man who had attended this event 14 times and knew how to look like the table he was at was the table he had intended. 2 people he knew were at nearby tables. Neither made eye contact with the enthusiasm they once would have. One waved with the brief, distracted wave of someone whose attention was already elsewhere. He sat down. He ordered a drink. He looked at the program. Obsidian Energy was listed as the evening's featured presentation. Strategic consultant and deal architect, Mira Dane. He read her name in print in the program of the Obsidian Gala and felt something move through him that he did not have a clean word for. Not guilt exactly, not quite remorse. Something more like the specific vertigo of a man who has stepped off what he believed was solid ground and discovered mid-fall that the geography was entirely different from his map. He looked toward the center of the room. He found the Thorn Enterprises table. He found her. She was talking to someone beside her, leaning slightly forward, focused, present. She wore something sapphire. There was a necklace at her throat that caught the light in a way that registered even at this distance. She did not look like a woman who had spent 6 weeks in a queen's apartment eating soup on a hot plate. She did not look like the woman he had handed a manila envelope and told to sign by morning. She looked like someone who had always belonged at the center of the room and had simply been elsewhere for a while. Vincent looked down at his drink. The program began at 8:30. The organizing committee's chair, a woman named Harriet Cross, who had run the event for 9 years, opened with the year's overview, the significant deals, the industry movements, the names and companies that had defined the 12 months. Vincent's name was not among them. He had not expected it to be, but hearing its absence confirmed in real time was its own particular weight. At 9:15, Harriet Cross said, "This year's featured achievement represents something the committee considers genuinely rare. It is not simply a successful deal. It is a demonstration of what it looks like when an analyst sees what the market has decided not to see bets on that vision completely and builds something real from what everyone else discarded. Please welcome to the stage the strategic architect of the Obsidian Energy deal, Mira Dane." The room applauded, not the polite applause of obligation, the real kind, the kind that builds from scattered recognition into something collective. Julian started it at the Thorn table, steady and deliberate. Patricia joined. Then the Hartwell table. Then the consortium at table 11, the same people who had passed on Project O in 2021 and were now applauding the woman who had seen what they had missed. Mira stood. She walked to the stage. She walked the way she had walked out of a penthouse elevator into a rainstorm 7 months ago, without performance, without armor, simply present in her own body and moving forward. She reached the podium. She looked at the room. 300 people looked back. She found Julian's face. He gave her the small nod that meant exactly what she needed it to mean. She did not look for Vincent's face. She did not need to. 7 months ago, she said, a company called Project O had 40,000 shares outstanding a patent portfolio that had never been correctly valued, 2 engineers who had built something that worked, and a market consensus that it was finished. She paused. The market consensus was wrong. The room was very quiet. I know it was wrong because I spent 6 weeks reading every document that existed about that company before I brought the thesis to anyone else. I know it was wrong because David Park and Soren Albrecht built a thermal energy storage system that functions at exactly the efficiency the published papers claim. And I know the papers are accurate because I found the research that the secondary sources were pulling from, and I read the primary data myself. She let that sit for a moment. I am telling you this not to describe my own process, but to make a specific point. The information was available. The data existed. The technology was documented. The market passed on it not because it looked closely and found it wanting. The market passed on it because it had already decided. She moved into the presentation. She walked the room through the technology, the restructuring, the capital deployment, the industrial partnerships. She spoke without slides because she did not need them. Everything she said she knew from the inside out, from 7 months of 18-hour days and 40-page files and late nights at a small table in Queens and meetings in Brooklyn offices with boxes still in the corners. She was 11 minutes in when she said, "The single most expensive mistake in capital allocation is not the wrong bet. It is the premature conclusion. It is looking at something and deciding what it is before you have actually looked." At table 19, Vincent Hale set down his drink very carefully. She had not said his name. She would not say his name. She didn't need to. The room did not need it either. The information was in the architecture of the story she was telling, not in its details. And the people in this room were intelligent enough to hear the structure beneath the words. "Obsidian Energy is currently valued at $420 million, Mira said. It was valued 7 months ago at approximately nothing. The technology did not change between then and now. The leadership changed. The capital structure changed. The language used to explain it to the market changed. What we built was not a new thing. We correctly described an existing thing." She looked at the room steadily. That distinction matters. Value does not appear when capital arrives. Value exists and waits for the person with the patience to look at it without the interference of a conclusion already formed. The applause began before she finished the final sentence. By the time she stepped back from the podium, it had reached the full 300, and it was the kind of applause that a room produces when something true has been said in a way that cuts past the professional and reaches the human being sitting inside the professional. Julian was on his feet. Patricia was on her feet. The Hartwell table was on its feet. One by one, the room stood. Mira stood at the podium and received it without deflecting it and without performing gratitude in excess of what she actually felt. She felt it fully, allowed it to be real, and then she walked back to her seat with the same unperformed presence she had walked to the stage with. Sam beside her said very quietly, "That was extraordinary." "Thank you," she said. She meant it simply. And Rhea reached across the table and put her hand over Mira's for one moment and said nothing. Mira looked at her and nodded. Julian said across the table, "The Sovereign Wealth Fund is going to double their meeting request after tonight." "I know," she said. Across the room at table 19, Vincent Hale had not stood during the applause. He had sat with his hands flat on the table and his drink untouched and the program open in front of him to the page with her name on it. He was not a man given to public displays of emotion, and he was not having one now. What was happening was interior and invisible and far more significant than any external performance could have been. He was understanding something, not intellectually. He had understood it intellectually for several weeks. He was understanding it in the way that actual comprehension happens in the body, below the level of reasoning, in the part of a person that knows things independent of whether the mind has given permission to know them. He had looked at Mira Dane for 15 years and not seen her. He had looked at Project O for 30 seconds and made a permanent decision. He had operated his entire life from the assumption that his assessments were correct because his confidence in them was high, and he had never understood until this specific evening in this specific room that confidence and accuracy are not the same instrument. She had seen what he had not seen. She had done what he could not have done, and she had done it with the asset he had handed her as an insult. He stood up from table 19. He did not make a scene of it. He simply rose quietly and walked toward the center of the room in the direction of the Thorne Enterprises table. He told himself he did not know exactly what he was going to say. That was not entirely true. Mira saw him coming from 12 feet away. She had not been watching for him. She simply looked up at the right moment, and he was there moving through the tables toward her. His face controlled in the way she recognized the boardroom face, the face that did not reveal the calculation happening behind it. Julian saw him too. He was on his feet before Vincent reached the table. "Mr. Hale," Julian said. His voice was perfectly even, the voice of a man who had anticipated this moment and had decided exactly how it would proceed. "This isn't the right place for whatever you're considering." Vincent stopped. He looked at Julian and then at Mira. He said directly to her, "I need 5 minutes." "You don't," Mira said. Not unkindly, factually. "Mira, His voice dropped the boardroom register. Underneath it was something she had not heard from him in a very long time, something that sounded like a person rather than a position. Please. She looked at him steadily. She looked at the man she had loved, who had loved her in whatever limited way he was capable of, who had mistaken the limits of his own vision for limits in the world itself. She looked at him, and she did not feel triumph, and she did not feel hatred, and she did not feel the particular satisfaction of a revenge completed, because this had never been about revenge. It had been about the work. It had always been about the work. There's nothing to discuss, she said. Eleanor Voss has everything you need from our side. Robert Fane has her number. She paused. I hope you resolve the operating agreement situation quickly. The exposure is manageable if you move on it now. Vincent stared at her. You know about that. I know a great many things, she said simply. Julian took one step to place himself directly between Vincent and the table, not aggressively, geometrically. A closed door made of presence rather than force. Mr. Hale, he said quietly, you're at the wrong table. I suggest you return to yours before this becomes visible to more people than it already is. Vincent looked at Julian. He looked at the room around him, at the eyes that were beginning to find this interaction, the way eyes always find the thing in a room that is not quite right. He understood the geometry of the moment completely. He was standing at the center table, uninvited, in a room where the center table was not his. He was the wrong element in a correctly arranged picture. He looked at Mira one more time. She met his eyes without flinching, without anger, without pity. She met them the way you meet the eyes of someone you have fully understood and fully moved past. He turned and walked back to table 19. He did not stay for the remainder of the program. What happened in the weeks that followed happened the way consequences happen, when they have been a long time building quickly, completely, without the drama of suddenness, because the groundwork had already been laid. Robert Fane reached a settlement on the operating agreement dispute in 11 days. The figure was closer to the higher end of his projection than the lower. It was survivable, but it was significant, and the financial press picked up the broad strokes of it through the public filings that accompanied the settlement. Not front page, not a crisis, but visible in the way that the financial industry makes things visible when someone's year has gone wrong. A paragraph here, a data point there. Enough for the people who needed to know to know. 2 of Vincent's major investors requested a review meeting. The meetings were professional and not hostile, but their tone communicated a recalibration in progress. One of them, a sovereign fund that had been a Hale Capital partner for 7 years, reduced their commitment for the following year by 30%. The reduction was explained in language about portfolio diversification. Everyone understood what it meant. Camilla moved out of the Tribeca apartment on a Thursday. She sent 3 movers and a terse message informing Vincent that she had taken the things that were hers. The fashion line, which had spent 8 months having a logo and no business plan, was formally dissolved the following week. She posted a photo on social media 2 weeks later, somewhere warm with a man named Theo, who worked in tech venture capital. She looked as easy and bright-eyed as she had looked on the yacht in the photo Vincent had shown Mira on the night he swept her life off his desk. Vincent did not post anything. He moved through the following weeks with the careful efficiency of someone managing a situation rather than living a life. He restructured 2 of his operating agreements. He had productive conversations with the investors who had not reduced their commitments. He went to his office and did his work, and did it competently because whatever else Vincent Hale was, he was not incompetent. He had built something real over 20 years. The something real was diminished, but it was not gone. What was gone was the invulnerability, the absolute certainty, the particular quality of a man who has never been wrong in a way he could not explain away. He had been wrong about Project O in a way that the whole industry could now read in the numbers in the valuation, in the $420 million that sat on a balance sheet bearing a name he had handed away as an insult. He sat in his office late on a November evening and opened a browser and read Kieran Walsh's profile of Mira for the second time. He read it differently than he had read it the first time. The first time he had read it, looking for the error, the angle, the place where the narrative was being managed. The second time he read it looking at the facts. The facts were not flattering to him, and they were not meant to be, but Walsh had written them without editorializing, which in some ways made them harder to absorb because there was nothing to argue with. He closed the browser. He sat in the quiet office. He was 54 years old and he was good at his work, and his work had just taught him something it had taken the whole industry watching to teach him. He had not lost a competitor. He had not lost a deal. He had lost the person who had understood what he was doing better than anyone else in his life, who had supported its construction for 15 years without recognition, who had taken the one thing he dismissed as worthless and revealed it to be the most valuable asset he had ever touched. He had not just underestimated her professional ability. He had underestimated what it meant that she had been beside him for 15 years, and he had never actually looked at her. He had looked at the role she occupied and assumed he understood the person occupying it. He had made the same error with Mira that he had made with Project O. He had looked and decided before he had actually seen. That understanding did not come with a resolution. There was no action that followed from it. It simply sat in him, accurate and permanent, a correction to a map he could no longer use. At Thorne Enterprises, Mira was closing the Sovereign Wealth Fund meeting. It ran for 2 hours and finished with a term sheet that Rhea reviewed on the spot and confirmed was structured in exactly the terms Julian had projected. The fund committed $240 million to the next phase of Obsidian Energy's industrial expansion. When the fund's lead partner shook her hand at the end of the meeting, he said, "We should have taken this call 6 weeks ago." "Yes," she said pleasantly, "but you're here now." She walked back to her office. She sat at her desk. She thought about 6 weeks ago, which was the gala, which was the room standing, and Vincent at table 19, and Julian's small nod from across the table. She thought about 7 months ago, which was Queen's and the hot plate and the legal pad and 40,000 shares of something everyone had already decided was nothing. She pulled up the current valuation of her shares on her screen. The 40,000 shares Vincent had included in the settlement as a parting gesture, as a technicality, as the kind of thing you add to a document for the sake of completeness and do not bother to look at twice. She looked at the number for a long moment. Then she opened her email and wrote to David Park. She wrote, "The fund meeting closed. We're moving to phase 2. Tell Soren he can stop refreshing the news. And tell him I still know he cried." David wrote back in 4 minutes, "He wants me to tell you he didn't. He's lying." She was smiling when Julian appeared in her office doorway. He leaned against the frame in the way he did when he had something to say, but was taking his time deciding how to say it. "The fund meeting," he said. "Closed clean," she said. "Rhea has the term sheet." "I know. She sent it 20 minutes ago." He looked at her. "I want to talk to you about the next phase structure, specifically about your role in it." She waited. "I want to offer you the joint CEO position," he said. "Thorne and Obsidian operating as a formal joint venture with shared executive leadership. Your title, your compensation, your authority over the Obsidian operational structure full and unambiguous." He paused. "I should have offered it sooner. I was watching to see if you wanted it or if you were going to tell me you wanted something else. You've never asked for anything you didn't earn first." Mira looked at him. "Is this because of the fund meeting?" "The fund meeting confirmed what I already knew," he said. "The offer is because you built this and you should lead it, and anything else would be a misallocation of the most important asset in this room." She was quiet for a moment, not uncertain, absorbing. "Yes," she said. "I accept." Julian straightened from the doorframe. "Good. My team will have the formal structure to you by end of week." He turned to go and then stopped. "One more thing. The Gala Committee has already been in touch. They want to feature Obsidian Energy again next year. They specifically asked whether you would be the presenter." Mira thought about the room standing. She thought about 300 people who had not known her name 12 months ago and would remember it for the rest of their professional lives. "Tell them yes," she said. Julian left. She turned back to her screen. She had a Phase 2 deployment schedule to review and a partnership framework to build, and a team that would be in the office tomorrow morning expecting her to lead them, and she would lead them the way she led everything, completely honestly, without the ego that mistakes confidence for accuracy, and without the fear that mistakes caution for wisdom. She had one more thing to do before the day ended. She opened her phone. She pulled up the contact she had not called in 7 months. She held it for a moment. Then she put the phone face down on the desk. There was nothing to say to Vincent Hale. Everything that needed to be said had been said in rooms he had not been invited to, in documents he had not been able to challenge, in a valuation that appeared now in every financial publication that covered the clean energy sector. The language of what she had built was clearer than anything she could have said to his face. She left the phone face down and turned off her desk lamp and picked up her bag and walked to the elevator and wrote it down and stepped out into the November night. The city was cold and bright and moving in every direction at once, the way it always moved, indifferent to individual stories, carrying all of them simultaneously. She walked toward the subway. She was the CEO of a $400 million company. She was a partner of one of the most respected private investment firms in the country. She was a woman who had been handed a 12-pound bag and a settlement that was designed to be the end of her, and she had taken the one overlooked line item in that document and built it into something the whole industry was watching. She did not feel the need to look back. There was no version of behind her that required further attention. What required attention was ahead. The Phase 2 deployment, the industrial expansion, the sovereign fund partnership, the team she was going to lead into the next year of building something that had started as a buried technology, and a 40-page file on a narrow desk in Queens. She walked down the subway stairs. She got on the train. She sat with her bag on her lap, and the city moving past the windows in its dark and ordinary way, and she thought about nothing sentimental and nothing dramatic. She thought about the work. And somewhere uptown, in an office that was quieter than it used to be, Vincent Hale turned off his desk lamp and sat for a moment in the dark. And in the dark, he finally understood the full cost of the most expensive mistake a person can make. Not the mistake of a bad investment, not the mistake of a failed strategy, but the mistake of looking directly at something extraordinary and deciding without examination that it was ordinary. He had made that mistake once. He would spend a long time understanding that once was enough. Mira Dane had not reclaimed her life. She had built a new one entirely her own from the ground up with her own hands and her own mind, and the one asset a man had discarded without looking at it twice. She had not needed rescue. She had not needed revenge. She had needed only what she had always had the capacity to see clearly, the discipline to act on what she saw, and the understanding that the most powerful thing a person can do is refuse to accept someone else's assessment of their worth. She had refused. She had built. She had won. Not by destroying what had been done to her, but by becoming completely, finally, irrevocably herself. That was the ending. And it was enough. That was the ending. And it was enough. But endings Mira Dane would come to understand are rarely as final as the sentence that names them. The difference between a conclusion and a beginning is often only a matter of where you decide to stand while you look at it. She had stood in the wreckage of a marriage and called it an ending. She had stood on the same ground 11 months later and understood that it had only ever been a door. The winter passed. The Phase 2 deployment of Obsidian Energy went live in February, ahead of schedule and under budget, and the Sovereign Wealth Fund's $240 million did exactly what Julian had projected. It turned a proven technology into a scaled one. By March, 3 of the largest industrial manufacturers in the country had signed retrofit agreements. By April, the company that had been valued at approximately nothing carried a valuation the financial press had stopped describing with adjectives because the numbers had become large enough that adjectives only diminished them. Mira had moved out of the Queen's apartment in January, not far and not anywhere ostentatious. She had taken a 2-bedroom in Long Island City with a window that looked at the river instead of at another window, and furnished it slowly, buying only things she actually wanted, rather than things that signaled anything to anyone. But she had kept one thing from Queens, and it sat on the kitchen counter where she saw it every morning. A cheap ceramic mug she had bought at a bodega for $2.99 during her first week, when everything she owned still weighed less than 12 pounds. She drank her coffee from it every day and did not explain it to anyone. The work filled her the way it had always been meant to. She ran the joint venture the way Julian ran everything, with questions instead of assertions, with a room built to find the flaw rather than to protect the conclusion. She was good at making people unafraid to tell her she was wrong, which meant that on the rare occasions she was wrong, she found out quickly and cheaply. She thought sometimes about the rooms Vincent had built. Instead, rooms designed to confirm him, where the truth arrived late because everyone had learned it was unwelcome. She did not think about it with satisfaction, but the way you think about a road you did not take with a clear-eyed recognition of where it led. Soren Albrecht had cried again at the Phase 2 launch, and this time, David Park did not bother to keep it a secret. Rhea now ran capital structure for the entire venture. Sam had presented at a conference in Chicago and called her afterwards, still breathless, to say that people had asked him questions as though his answers mattered. They were all of them better than they had been a year ago, and Mira understood that she had not made them better, so much as she had made room for the better versions of themselves that had always been present and simply uninvited. That was the thing she had not expected to learn. Not how to build a company. She had known she could do that. What she had learned was what it had cost her all those years to be uninvited. And once you have felt the full weight of that cost in your own life, you develop a specific kind of vision. You start to see everywhere you look the uninvited, the overlooked, the buried. The things and the people the world has glanced at once and filed under finished without the patience to look twice. Which is how Mira Dane came to notice Noor Haddad. Noor was 29 and worked 3 floors down at Thorne Enterprises in a role that had her name on no deal reconciling trade discrepancies in the operations group, the kind of job that is essential and invisible in exactly equal measure. She had no Ivy League degree. She had gone to community college and then a state school at night while she worked and had come into the firm through the back office, because that was the only door that had opened for someone whose resume read, to the people who read resumes for a living, as a story about limits rather than persistence. Mira had met her the way you meet people who are not supposed to be in the meeting by accident. Noor had been asked to sit in on a reconciliation review because a discrepancy in the Obsidian Capital deployment had traced back to her group, and she had spent 90 seconds explaining it, and then unprompted 30 more explaining why it had appeared in the first place, a structural flaw in how the deployment tranches were sequenced, a flaw that no one in the room with a title had noticed. Mira had watched the room begin to dismiss her at second 40, and then stop at second 70, when it became clear the person with no title was describing a problem the people with titles had missed. And Mira had recognized something. Not the insight, though the insight was correct. She had recognized the shape of the thing, a mind that saw what the room had decided not to see attached to a person the room had decided not to hear. She had seen that shape before. She had worn it. She asked Noor to stay after the meeting. She asked her what else she had noticed in her time in the back office that no one with authority had wanted to hear. And Noor Haddad, carefully, the way you offer something valuable to someone who might drop it, told her about a company called Kestrel Minerals. Kestrel had spent 4 years developing a process for recovering critical minerals, the rare, strategically vital materials modern batteries could not exist without, from mine tailings, the waste sludge that mining operations paid to store. The process worked. But the company had made every business mistake it was possible to make, chased a consumer story instead of an industrial one, burned its capital on a facility it did not need, run by people who understood chemistry and not money. It had collapsed 8 months ago into dissolution, its process patents sitting in a distressed asset portfolio that 3 firms had already passed on because the market had decided the sector was radioactive after Kestrel's public failure. "Everyone thinks it's dead," Noor said, "but it's not the technology that failed. It's—" and she stopped looking for the word. "It's the execution," Mira said quietly. "Yes." Noor looked at her with the particular surprise of someone who has been carrying a thought alone for a long time and has just heard it spoken back to them. "It's the execution. The chemistry is real. I checked the primary data. I read the papers the secondary sources were pulling from." Mira sat very still. She was not looking at Noor anymore. She was looking at a narrow desk in Queens, at a legal pad filled with economical handwriting, at a 40-page file she had built at 4 a.m. about a company everyone had decided was worthless. I read the primary data myself. She had said those exact words on a stage before 300 people. She had not taught them to Noor. Noor had arrived at them on her own in the back office at night, unrewarded and uninvited. "Bring me everything you have," Mira said. "Not tomorrow. Now." "And Noor," the younger woman stopped at the door, "present it to me the way you would if you already knew I believed you. Don't ask permission to be right. Just be right, and let me catch up." It took Noor 2 days to assemble the file. It was 41 pages. Mira read it 3 times, and what she saw was not a dead company. It was a buried one sitting on a process that recovered value from the exact thing the world discarded, waiting for a single person with the patience to look at it without the interference of a conclusion already formed. She brought it to Julian on a Thursday. He read it the way he always read, slowly questioning. When he finished, he set it down. "This is good. This is very good. Who built the thesis?" "Noor Haddad, Operations Group, 3rd floor." Julian looked at her for a long moment, and something passed across his face that she recognized because she had been on the receiving end of it herself in a small office a year and 2 months ago, when a man who did not care about credentials had decided to test whether he had meant it. "Bring her up," Julian said. "I want to hear it from her." Mira did not run the Kestrel presentation. She sat in the back while Noor ran it, and she watched Patricia Osei ask the questions that dismantled presentations like machines being taken apart, and watched Noor answer them not perfectly, but with the unperformed accuracy of someone who knew the thing from the inside. When Patricia asked the hardest question, whether the founding team's operational failure was solvable or fatal, Noor did not reach for reassurance. She walked her through exactly why it was solvable and cited without notes the structural change that would fix it. Afterward, in the hallway, Noor's hands were shaking, and Mira said nothing about it because she knew the shaking was not fear. It was the specific tremor of a person feeling for the first time in her working life the sensation of being used at her actual capacity. Mira knew. She had needed several days to name it herself. "Did I hold the room?" Noor asked. "You held the room," Mira said. Kestrel became a Thorne assessment 3 weeks later. Noor became a strategic consultant with her name on the work out of the back office at last, and Mira watched it happen with a feeling quieter and larger than the satisfaction of her own success had ever been. She had done for Noor what Julian had done for her. And Julian, she now understood, had known something, when he did it, that the most valuable thing you can find in a room is not a deal or a technology. It is a person the room has misjudged. Value does not appear when you promote someone. Value exists and waits, and the whole art of it is looking without a conclusion already formed. She thought about Vincent then, as she sometimes did, with neither warmth nor bitterness. He had looked at her for 15 years and seen a woman who was finished. He had looked at 40,000 shares for 30 seconds and made a permanent decision. She understood finally that these were the same act. He had spent his whole life confident that his glance was a judgment and had never learned the difference between looking and seeing. That failure had cost him more than a company and a marriage. It had cost him the ability to ever be surprised by the world in a good way, because a man who has already decided everything can only be surprised in the direction of loss. The letter came in October. It arrived at her office in a plain envelope, hand-addressed, which was itself information, because Vincent Hale did not hand-address things. Inside was a single sheet of paper, and on it, in his precise handwriting, were 4 paragraphs. She read them once at her desk, with the afternoon light coming in over the river. He did not ask for anything. That was the first thing she noticed, the way she had once read his entire state from the punctuation of a 4-word email. This letter made no case. It did not try to reopen a negotiation or manage a narrative. He wrote that he had read the Kestrel announcement and seen her name and Noor Haddad's beside it, and had understood immediately what she had done, because he had watched her do it once before from the wrong side of it. He wrote that he had spent the past year understanding one thing that he had been given for 15 years, the single most valuable asset of his life, had held it in his hands every day and never once looked at it, and by the time he looked, it was on someone else's balance sheet, appreciating. He was not writing to be forgiven, he said, because forgiveness was not his to request. He was writing because a person should say a true thing at least once, even late, even to no purpose. And the true thing was this: you were never stagnant. I was never looking. Mira sat with the letter for a while. She did not feel the vindication she might have imagined a year ago if someone had told her it would one day arrive. What she felt was smaller and cleaner, the particular quiet of a debt being acknowledged by the person who owed it, which is a different thing from the debt being paid, because some debts cannot be paid, and the acknowledgement is the only currency left. She did not write back. There was nothing to write. But she did not throw the letter away either. She put it in a drawer face up and left it there, and that was its own kind of answer, though he would never know it. She saw him once more that same autumn, and the geometry of it was such that she almost laughed at how precisely the world sometimes rhymes with itself. It was in the lobby of a building neither of them owned a neutral tower in Midtown, where both Thorne and what remained of Hale Capital happened to keep meetings. She was walking toward the elevator bank, and he was walking away from it, and there was a moment unavoidable when they were the only two people in a marble lobby that had once been the kind of room that opened for him without effort. He stopped. She stopped. He looked older than the photograph in her memory. Hale Capital had survived. He had settled the dispute, absorbed the losses, kept the machine running because whatever else he was not incompetent. But some certainty had gone out of the set of his shoulders, and she understood that she was looking at a man who had learned permanently that his confidence and his accuracy were not the same instrument, a lesson that had cost him the very thing that had made him formidable. "Mira," he said. "Vincent." That was all either of them said for a moment. There was nothing hostile in it and nothing warm. There was only the accurate acknowledgement of two people who had once shared a life and now shared only the fact of having shared it. The elevator behind him opened. He glanced at it, then back at her. "After you," he said, and stepped aside. She understood the offer for what it was, the only thing he had left to give a man holding a door for the woman whose door he had once pointed at and called an exit. She could have declined. It could have made it mean something. Instead, she accepted it the way you accept a thing that costs the giver more than it costs you. "Thank you," she said, and she stepped into the elevator. She did not hold it for him, and he did not expect her to. The doors closed between them, and she rode up alone, thinking with a clarity that was almost gentle about the last time an elevator had closed between them, 41 floors above a storm, when she had ridden down out of his life in a soaked dress with everything she owned in a 12-pound bag. She had thought that ride was the end of her. It had been the beginning. The doors had not been closing on her life. They had been closing on his version of it. The next Obsidian Gala was in November, and Harriet Cross had asked Mira to be the presenter, and Mira had said yes. She walked to the stage the way she always walked, without armor present in her own body. The room stood before she reached the podium 300 people who had learned her name in a single year and would not forget it. She let the applause be real without performing gratitude in excess of what she felt. And then she did the thing that was the entire reason she had said yes. "A year ago," she said, "I stood on this stage and told you that the most expensive mistake in capital allocation is the premature conclusion. I want to correct myself tonight. It is not a mistake of capital. It is a mistake of attention. And the cure for it is not more analysis. It is a willingness to look at the thing the room has already dismissed and to keep looking after the room has moved on." She paused. "I did not find kestrel minerals," she said. "I want to be precise about that because precision is the only form of respect that matters in this room. Kestrel was found by an analyst who spent 4 years in a back office that no one here can name reading technical filings at night because she could not stop seeing what everyone else had decided not to see. Her name is Noor Haddad. She was never a story about limits. She was a story about a door that took too long to open." Mira looked out at the tables. "I was that story once. Someone opened the door for me. Tonight, I am simply passing the favor forward and asking each of you to go back to your firms and find the person you have filed under finished, who is in fact only uninvited. They are there. They are always there. The whole art of this business is the patience to see them." She asked Noor to stand. Noor stood at table 6, her hands not quite steady, and the room turned toward her and applauded. And Mira watched from the stage as a young woman felt for the first time in her life 300 of the most powerful people in her industry look at her and see accurately exactly who she was. That was the moment Mira had come for. Not her own applause. That. Later, after the term sheets and the introductions and the long, slow dispersal of a room that did not want to end, Mira walked out into the November night. The city was cold and bright and moving in every direction at once, indifferent to individual stories, carrying all of them simultaneously. She did not take a car. She walked toward the subway the way she always had, a woman worth more on paper than she could spend in 3 lifetimes, who still liked the honest rhythm of a train in a window and the dark going by. She thought about the ceramic mug on her counter that had cost $2.99. She thought about Noor, who would spend the next year discovering the size of what she actually was. She thought about Vincent stepping aside in a marble lobby holding a door at last, and found she wished him not ill and not well, but simply the thing he had denied himself for a lifetime, the chance to one day look at something and truly see it before deciding what it was. She got on the train. She sat with her bag on her lap and the city sliding past the windows in its ordinary way, and she thought about nothing sentimental. She thought about the work, the Phase 3 expansion, the Kestrel assessment, the door she would open next, and the one after that. Because she understood now what the work had actually been all along. It had never been the deals. Those were only the visible part. The work was the refusal to accept anyone's conclusion, including the world's about what a thing was worth before you had the patience to see it for yourself. She had been handed a bag that weighed less than 12 pounds and a line item designed to be the end of her. She had turned it into a company, and then into a career, and then finally into the only thing that had ever really mattered, a way of seeing that she could give to someone else. She had not reclaimed her life. She had built a new one, and then she had held the door for the next person walking in from the rain. The train carried her home through the dark, and she was at last completely, finally, irrevocably herself, and no longer the only one. That was the ending, and this time it was more than enough.